session, and I was hoping that the other two speakers would speak about disruptive innovation. Because I am not a management person, I am not a businesswoman, I am not an entrepreneur. I am an educator, I am a teacher basically. So I studied the topic, but I was more interested in looking at the link between disruptive innovation and education methodologies. So my presentation is basically about looking at disruptive innovation through the lens of educational methodologies in India. But since we don't have the first two speakers to introduce the topic as such, I think I will just introduce the topic also to you. Most of you must be familiar with the idea of disruptive innovation because it is already more than 10 to 20 years since the idea has come. It was introduced by a Harvard professor, a professor of Harvard Business School called Clayton Christensen. And he wrote about the idea in his book called The Innovator's Dilemma in 1997, as you see. And Mr. Christensen was an entrepreneur, and then later he came into teaching. The whole idea of disruptive innovation is that it is a new, Clayton Christensen defines disruptive innovation as an innovation. It's basically a marketing technique rather than a technological innovation. The innovation is not in the technology basically, but it is in how the technology is associated with other ideas and how it creates an innovation in the market. It actually creates a new market, breaking or disrupting the existing market. So it's not seen as these are some of the words that Christensen himself uses. It is not seen as a disrupting force. The very word disruption, the word disruption has a negative connotation. But Christensen says that it is a positive force by which you create a new product which has a new market. It is simpler, more accessible and more affordable. And the first example that Clay Christensen talks about is that of the computer. From the disk drive, how it became the big PC, and then it became the laptop, and then it became small tablets, and then it became the smartphone. So the smartphone is something which is easy, simple, accessible and affordable. So the idea here is that not to create more expensive computers, but to create, the computer market is still there, but you create a new market for the same technology with a little more wider application and also make it more accessible and affordable. So you don't have to be technically very technical know-how. You don't have to really pass any computer course or know about the computer, about the technical parts of the computer, but anyone can use it. So now we know that even when you're 50, 60, you can use a smartphone. So that is what he basically means by the disruptive innovation. It is the two terms are sustaining technology and disruptive technology. So you have a technology which gives you the computers and all that, and then you have one more technology coming in, or a more democratization of the same technology, so that you have something which disrupts the existing market and creates a completely new market which you had not expected before. And Clayton Christensen also talks about the one example that he gives is that of the mill, the steel plant. How in England and in America they created the mini steel plant. And also many other examples. See, you can, all information is not, it is not silent or it is not expensive anymore. Anyone can get any of this information in the net. You have the idea called the TED Talk. I'm sure many of you must have heard about TED Talks. The TED Talks are TED. TED is Technology, Entertainment and Design. It is a 18-minute presentation by people of all walks of life about how exactly they did how they came up in their lives. So Clayton Christensen himself has given this TED talk, which is on the internet, and any of you can watch it. Now, these are some of the ideas that Clayton Christensen talks about, and this is what interests me, because I am not an entrepreneur. So those who are interested in the business part of disruptive innovation can always go into the techniques and look as to how you can do this. But Christensen is a professor, he's a teacher basically, and what he is talking about is, it is not any new technology or anything. Basically it is a mindset. It is a thought which creates innovation. And he talks about how he spoke to the leaders in Intel and gave them the idea to invent, their new products. Then he says it is not what to think, but how to think. So innovation as such, whether it is disruptive or sustaining, especially disruptive innovation. Disruptive innovation is something that disrupts an existing fashion in the market and creates a new fashion, which becomes very affordable and accessible to everybody. So the idea about how you create this thing, how does it happen, who creates these technologies, who disrupts, it is always the people in an organization who do it. So basically it is about thought process. Anyone who thinks differently can become a disruptive innovator. So it is not what to think, but how to think. And he actually says that this is a theory through which, if you look at this theory, if you study this theory, you can actually see what is going to happen in the future. So you are looking at a market which is probably going to come for this new product. You have not launched it as yet, but you are sure that it is going to become successful. And what I was interested in basically is this, learning to think innovatively, because all these people, everybody who talks about innovation and creativity, link it to the idea of creativity. While in India, in America, we must realize that there are institutes for creativity. Clayton Christensen himself has started an institute called the Clayton Christensen Institute of Disruptive Innovation. There are plenty of universities and institutes that are dedicated to teaching creativity. In India, we have the concept of creativity is very often synonymous with the term genius in India. We often think that creative genius, we use the term creative genius, and genius is something which is very rare, only certain blessed people, certain rare people have what you call genius or creativity. But today, especially after a lot of research in educational psychology and cognitive psychology about the processes of the brain, the general consensus is that creativity or genius is not a gift or a rare gift that certain people have. It is a skill which actually can be learned. There is a lady called Elizabeth Gilbert who has written this very famous book called Eat, Pray and Live. It became very famous recently because it's based in India and all that. And she again talks about the same idea of creativity not being something that is internal always, but it can be an external force also. So in India we are not used to thinking of it like that. We don't actually teach creativity or understand the function of the brain which is called creativity. So it is actually linked to what we should do here, or in India we have very little of this kind of innovation and innovative products coming and taking up the market, precisely because we do not have an education culture that promotes this kind of thought process. That is my understanding of the idea of innovation. When you talk about education, this is Clayton Christensen's ideas about creativity, about creative innovation, which we can look at later. Now, if you look at this,
sound is not working.
The sound is not working. In India, in school education, you have something called the B.Ed and M.Ed courses, in which people are taught how to teach. But in the higher education level, which is where I am situated, we do not have a proper teaching learning methodology courses. In fact, the first learning methodology center was started in IIT Madras only in 2009. Teachers do not have a specific methodology or a specific research and training methodology for higher education learners. And you must remember that, keep in mind that it is generally from the college level that you go into your jobs, and that is when creativity actually should come, and it usually comes from the younger generation always. It is the younger brains which are always more creative and more innovative. So learning to think creatively is one aspect that has been neglected to a certain extent, to a large extent, especially in higher education in India. If you look at America, you have a person called Benjamin Bloom in the late 1960s who evolved what you call a teaching methodology. And even today, in all over the world, whether it's in America or UK